So I'm Michael Strong. This is When School's Not Working, our weekly show about both why school doesn't work and how other options for learning do. I'm the founder, and I haven't told my co-host this. We've now changed Expanse to the Socratic Experience. So I'm the founder of the Socratic Experience, formerly known as Expanse. And I expect I'll talk more about that later, but we'll go to Matt Barnes.
Hey, hello everybody. Matt Barnes, the co-founder of The Education Game. And we believe in a world where parents have the inspiration and the passion and the equipping to know how to lead their children, regardless of the school that their children are in, if they're even in a school, to prepare them for the 21st century. So that's what we do. We work with parents. Great to see you guys tonight. And Kath, next up.
Yes, hi, I'm Catherine Fraise, founder of Workspace Education and 100 Roads, and we are reinventing, how education can happen outside of the school system. We work with parents, families, teens, anyone who wants to actually create an alternative learning environment for their community as well. And I love being here every Monday night for these conversations, but very excited tonight because we're going to be actually interviewing Michael Strong, our co-host, because first of all, he's had a very esteemed career in education. He's actually was, I should say, still is, Michael, one of my heroes in education. And he's had a long history in Montessori and in creating all different kinds of schools, and most recently, as you mentioned, the Socratic Experience. And we would like you to sort of understand his journey and why he is so passionate about education and creating really meaningful and deep experiences for children outside the school system and creating alternative schools that really light kids up. So thank you, Michael. So I don't know where you want to get started here, but I'd love for people to know your history.
Okay, well, that's I was explaining when I talked to all kinds of people, I like their origin stories. So yeah, so I'll go through that. I went to public schools, first in Minnesota, first in Colorado, then Minnesota, back in Colorado. I was a good student from a young age, and I did it because that's what you do. You go to school, and that's what everybody did. As a high school junior in Aspen, Colorado, I had a class where the teacher would just read. We would read and discuss ideas. So we would read Plato, Nietzsche, Buber, and we would just sit around and talk about it. And I loved it. All of a sudden, it was really interesting. Before then, I remember, school being boring, but I was good at it, so I'd play the boring school game. And after that, I discovered a college, St. John's College, where for 4 years, all you do is think and talk about books. And I was going to drop out of my junior year of high school and go to St. John's instead of senior year, but I only had 2 or 3 courses left for my high school degree. And I was working 20 hours a week in a restaurant and skiing. And as a consequence, I didn't, but I had good test scores. I didn't even know what the SAT was, but I was told to take this test. I did well. So my college counselor said, look, you can go to Harvard and study Greek and Plato and whatever you'd learned at St. John's, and you'd have a Harvard degree. So I applied, got to Harvard, and then halfway through, I was kind of bored, people talking at me, and I visited St. John's and loved it again. I'd visited it before, and so I managed to get a year away credit from Harvard for a year at St. John's, like study for a year abroad. And so I was going to have a freshman year at St. John's as my sophomore year at Harvard. Everybody is required to start as a freshman at St. John's regardless. But I got there, and within a day or two, I knew I'd never go back to Harvard because I just love thinking and talking about ideas. So after 4 years of that, I went to graduate school at the University of Chicago, where they had some similar pedagogy. And while there, I was training teachers to lead Socratic seminars through Mortimer Adler's Paideia program, which was active in Chicago. This is the 1980s. I had had no background in education, never taken one education course. So in that respect, a complete amateur, but 4 years at St. John's, talking about ideas. I was very Socratic, and so I managed to have a part-time gig training teachers. Then I got a full-time job as a Socratic teacher trainer in Alaska under the Alaska Paideia Project. That led to, that was on soft money, grant money. After a couple of years, the money ran out, and so me and my colleagues were unemployed. Some parents loved what we were doing in the public schools and asked me to start a private school for their children. And so kind of by accident, I became an education entrepreneur. I created the business plan for the Athenaeum School in Anchorage and got it started. At the same time, I was recruited by a Montessori school in San Antonio, the Judson Montessori School, where the founders had been educated by a Montessorian who thought that secondary Montessori should be Socratic, philosophical, personal growth and development, that kind of thing. And so I went to San Antonio to create a Montessori secondary school, again with no background in Montessori at all. While there, I discovered that one should interview one's boss because they didn't have the money or institutional support to start a secondary school. So I ended up helping raise money and then Socratizing the Montessori program. I wrote my book, The Habit of Thought, From Socratic Seminars to Socratic Practice at the time, and I was leading in-service training for teachers across the US in Socratic seminars. And then I was recruited to create a school for highly gifted children in South Florida, where we had middle school students passing advanced placement exams. The founder, we had an incredibly advanced math program, and the founder loved my Socratic humanities. Then I was asked to create Montessori middle schools for a multi-campus Montessori organization based in Palo Alto. Then I was asked to create a charter high school in Angel Fire, New Mexico. Then I met John Mackey of Whole Foods, and he and I created Flow, a nonprofit to promote entrepreneurial solutions to world problems. So I left education for about a decade. Then I came back in and created what was originally Co-School, was Montessori Socratic project-based. And then that was basically, I was hired by Higher Ground Education, the largest Montessori organization in the US, to create Montessori high schools for them based on Co-School. And last year I left to create a virtual low-cost version, which is now the Socratic Experience. So that's a quick tour of 35 years of starting schools and programs.
So I learned some things there too, Michael. I knew about a lot of your work, but didn't know about some of it. So that's really helpful. Kathy, can I ask him a question?
Oh yeah, please.
All right, Michael, we're turning the spotlight on you this time, brother. Get ready. First question. What is success in an educational context? What does it look like? Tell me what success is.
Lifelong happiness and well-being of the student. You know, the Greeks said, "Judge no man happy till he dies." You know, my ideal, I've thought a lot about evaluation, program evaluation. My ideal program evaluation is happiness and well-being of our students decades down the road. Obviously that's hard to get, but happiness and well-being up to say 21, 22. And I would love to track happiness and well-being of our students for as long as possible.
Wow. How would that work on a multiple choice test though, Michael? It's a state issue, multiple choice.
This is where one of the things I expect we'll get into is I sort of dance around self-directed education versus some structure. And of course, some self-directed purists don't like that I have some structure. Most people who like structure. I'm Montessori, I'm at the far end to follow the child. So basically, no multiple choice tests are required. Everything is optional. So to that extent, extremely self-directed. We do coach students. Most students, I would say 80 to 90% of our students want to go to college. Hey, if you want to go to college, it's useful to do well on the SAT and a few AP exams. Hey, we should, if this is an option, but as much as possible, get them, do you want to go to college or not? If you want to go to college, what kind of college? Depending on what kind of college, what's our strategy? And even, it's tricky how young they're capable of really thinking about this, but we start asking them these questions certainly by middle school. And so whether or not they are working to do well on SAT or AP, and I say SAT or AP because a lot of conventional education is driven by that college admissions thing. There's tremendous anxiety over college admission. But if one has high level intellectual skills, reading, writing, mathematical skills, college is just not a big deal. And depending if one's not ambitious about one's college, it's not a big deal anyway. So basically, if you have students who read and write well, and then, I would say the math is trickier because some students love math, and for them, I say there's no such thing as too much math. For students who don't love math but are passionate about something else, if the parents are okay, we can at some point either quit or do less math later on, or we have a startup finance course. So a lot of my students are creators or entrepreneurs, and they're, hey, let's learn how the finance of business works, and they typically are much more interested in that than algebra 1, algebra 2, yada yada yada.
Right.
So I have a question. Like if the ultimate goal of education is that happiness, like decades down the road, or even up into the early 20s, what would you say your recipe is? I'm sure you don't have anything cookie cutter in what you're creating there, but do you have like guidelines that parents could follow loosely to do that?
Sure, and again, in terms of parents, I love Matt's focus on a parental vision for your child. But first, I think good habits. All of us, if we develop good habits, we're going to be happier and more well. So, sleeping well, that sounds pretty banal, but sleep, exercise, good nutrition, those are pretty basic. And yet, as you both know, there are millions of kids who are not getting those basics, and sometimes because of school or social life or video game addictions or a million things. So healthy habits, old-fashioned, but still really valuable. I would add lots of reading and talking about ideas are useful. And I say that just because, and with some kids, maybe it's audiobooks rather than reading, but I think engagement with the world of ideas, maybe initially stories, engagement with stories, but then as they get into adolescence, the world of ideas, I think it's useful because, one of the things I'm often selling to kids, and this partly gets into consent. I was once going to write a book with Trevor Eisler of the Montessori Madmen about education needs to be consensual, much as sex does, with the implication that non-consensual education is rape, or the equivalent of, and that's pretty extreme. But I want the consent of the child, and so I'll ask them, hey, if someday do you want to make money? Almost every kid does want to make money, and even at a pretty young age, do you want to be dependent on your parents forever? I have never met a child who actively wants to be dependent on their parents forever. And the impulse to be free and capable is tremendous in the young person. And so, things like that. Well, if you want to be, independent, got to find a way to make money. How are you going to make money? Very basic questions. And so with things like this, I find that, one of my pet peeves about some kinds of self-directed education is let kids do whatever they want. Well, I would flip it around and say, yes, I want the child's consent, but I also want informed consent. And this is where you and I might disagree a bit on this, Kath. Playing video games for 12 years is not great. I want, as an older person who's experienced in the world, I want to have conversations with the child where, what do you want to do? And I'm here to help you. I know a lot about the world, and I'm here to help you figure out how to create a great life for yourself. Let's work together to figure out how to create a great life for yourself. And that probably is some way to make money. It's some way to be respected. Yeah, do you want to be respected when you're older? Oh yeah, every human being wants to be respected. So I'd say, in terms of getting the child's consent to do something valuable, as long as you're not forcing them to do school 6 hours a day, is it easy to get most children to focus on something valuable, especially if you limit addictions? I'll rant on that one for a little bit more and I'll pause. But the way I think of electronic addictions is like this pile of heroin or cocaine on the table or something, Why do you, and of course they're designed to be addictive. All of these things are designed to addiction. So this is kind of a Montessori. I think the genius of Montessori was not the pink tower. It was, let's focus on creating an environment within which the children can choose freely and will choose productive activities. So make your home full of rich, cool things for the children to do, and minimize addictive, things that'll give them bad habits and addictive behaviors. And then, coach them, talk to them, befriend them, be their kind of mentor on how to have a great life. And within that, oh, you don't want to read about history? No problem. You don't want to do science? Okay. You're going to do art all day? I'd be fine with a kid doing art all day. At some point, do you want to make a living of this? Let's talk about that, how you do that. So basically, let's figure out how together as a team for you to make a great life. And voila. It may sound a little bit simple, but yeah.
So like Expanse or your Socratic Experience is an online offering, not an in-person offering. And I just want to know what, can you have a really good online experience?
So
what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, I love face-to-face conversation, and I kind of resisted virtual forever. But we're having a conversation here. Would it be much, much nicer to be together? It would be so much nicer to be together. I'd love to be together with you guys. On the other hand, can we have a conversation virtually? Of course we can. And, with a little practice, then you get used to it and it's not so weird. So I would say, especially insofar as most of what we do is either conversational or kids doing their own thing off the computer. It doesn't really matter that much, actually.
Okay, so on that same vein, Michael, I get have a lot of conversations with folks in the traditional education space. In fact, I'm going to be meeting with a board member of Houston Independent School District next week. I'm not sure what she wants to talk about. It'll be an interesting conversation, I'm sure. But what you hear from the traditionals is you can't learn online. You have to be in person. So unpack what went wrong in this last year, why so many parents and kids are like, I don't want online again, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about what you think of that.
Sure. So before I started the Socratic Experience, we looked up the 3 best online public high schools in Texas, and they go from horrible to worse. And the best one had things like a history teacher dressed in a costume giving a history lecture. Again, I hate lectures. Anybody talks at me, the way I do a riff on lectures, if we're socializing, say at a party, and Matt comes to us and he gives us this 10-minute lecture, Kathy and I are going to try to get away from Matt as quickly as possible. What a jerk. That's what teaching is all day, every day. I do apology to teachers who do that, but I hate it. Personally, I hate it.
Well, kids don't like it either, Michael, truth be told.
There you go, exactly. And so you dressed in a costume online, is that going to make it better? No. That was, by the way, the best one. The next one was basically an interactive textbook. The third one was merely PDFs. And so, insofar as it's all static, online, boring school put online, of course it doesn't work. Insofar as our thing is human interaction works pretty well. So I have a fundamentally different notion of what school is. And also going back to the consent, if we're coaching somebody to have a great life, that's interactive conversational. And that can include, hey, in your great life, probably useful to learn a lot of math. How can we help you learn a lot of math so you can have the great life you want? Whatever it is, if the student, this is, voluntary agency. If the student wants to do it, total difference. I could rant on and on, but you guys get it in your very bones.
So I guess what I'm trying to do is make sure that the families that might be listening can really separate what you're offering from what they have been sold to date. And what they've been sold to date is the nasty unpleasantness of what happens in a traditional school. And now we somehow force the kid to sit in front of a screen and do the same thing. What you're talking about is light years different. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you package and structure your interactions with learners so you don't run into the same pattern of just boredom, drudgery that is typical.
Great question. I'll go in, because Socratic is core, and that's why we called Socratic Experience. First of all, if we're going to read something together, it's call it a book club, but an intellectually oriented book club. So if we're going to read something together and talk about it on Friday, and you guys don't read it, say we've got a whole group of 15 or whatever, the rest of us are talking about it, thinking about it, arguing about it, and you kind of feel left out if you didn't read it. Or if you read it and you didn't read it closely and carefully. Or you read it kind of carelessly, but you're not paying attention. Then all of a sudden, Matt says something so stupid, and I got to go in there and correct him. And oh, whoops! I have to look down at what we read. And look here, Matt. This is what it really says. And there's a natural human dynamic of kids. and part of it, going from the text, a core thing we talk about are what I think of as human universals: love, truth, justice. One of my eternal questions that always works with any group of students is, do you care if your best friend betrays you? Hello. Everybody has strong opinions about how they would feel if their best friend betrays them.
Right.
And so there are questions like that will always get a group going. I would say part of our expertise is connecting real human questions with questions in texts. One of the things that people don't realize is those of us who like to read books and ideas as adults, it's because it's meaningful. When I read history, I'm thinking about the world. When I read science, I'm thinking about the world. With all of this, it's because we're relating it to our lives. Kids have to relate, everybody has to relate stuff to their life. So if they're relating stuff to their life, they're going to be engaged. If in order to participate fully, they also need to read and understand a text, then their engagement goes from the passionate topic to what the words are saying on the page. And by means of, there is expertise in doing this, but over time, by means of learning how to do this well, we get kids, many of whom were not academic, to read, think, and talk about ideas in texts. After doing that a while, then it's not so hard to get them writing, because if I'm a writer, and I would say 95% of writing is thinking. Often I'm lying on the couch and my wife says, "What are you doing? Why aren't you working?" I said, no, I'm working hard. I'm thinking. I'm writing my next article. But we don't give kids time to think. We spend thousands and thousands of hours thinking in our classes, and by means of thousands and thousands of hours thinking, kids start having opinions on things, and then they want to, basically an essay is just an argument on paper. So that terrible, stupid thing Matt said, I gotta, argue against him. And next thing you know, they're writing essays.
Yeah.
I love that. They're thinking all the time.
Habit of thought. My book is called The Habit of Thought. Yeah.
Great.
Go ahead, Kath.
No, I'm just I'm curious now about the change of moving from Expanse to the Socratic Experience, and now it sounds very clear that you're really giving it a title that's really describing the kind of experience that your learners are having in your area. But what prompted that change? Is that something that you decided to do?
Well, on the positive side, there's kind of a burst of cool online innovative programs. As somebody who's been in this movement for decades, I'm so excited. So, you guys probably know some I don't, but Prisma and Sora schools, and I forget there's Ad Astra.
Galileo.
Yeah, exactly.
Astra.
All these things, and it's wonderful. And so I like kind of expand your mind. Really what's most distinctive about what we do is this deep Socratic experience. And kids talk about it, parents talk about it. Just to add a little bit, our morning consists of half an hour of just community where we talk freely about whatever, then half an hour of personal growth, which is not text-based. It's, how do you become a better learner? How do you learn from your mistakes? How do you set goals? How do you think about your life? How do you deal with anger? How do you deal with annoying people? But it's conversational, and the guide's role is to ask questions, and then an hour of Socratic on text. And so this conversational experience is fundamental to what we do. And that's what kids most love and most remember about what we do. And so in some ways, things like, individualized math programs or other things are all related to that. And I would say the other thing is, going back to my book, The Habit of Thought, I find that once students are engaged in learning and thinking and wanting to understand the world, that energizes everything. Give you one example. I once was working with a public high school teacher who had been teaching the French Revolution for 17 years. And she had a 3-week unit, and I said, I need 2 weeks of that to discuss Rousseau. And she was like, what? This is too much, but she agreed. We spent 2 weeks talking about Rousseau's essay on inequality, and the kids arguing about inequality, does it matter or not? Really bad, really good, whatever. They had lots of opinions. And then in that last week, she covered her regular history on the French Revolution didactically. But what she said is, now the kids cared about inequality. Now they could see why there was such passion around the French Revolution. Right. Before then, it was just blah, 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 blah. Exactly. But once you have an emotional connection to things, and even if you don't like it, I'm fine if we discuss a text and the kids, oh, I hate Aristotle, I jerk Aristotle. Okay, fine. But then they have a relationship to it, you know?
Yeah. And an opinion.
Exactly. And for me, I was great at memorize and forget tests. I mean, when I think, sometimes I feel this pressure, even I have this sort of voice of the alter ego from the establishment. Don't you need to be doing the teaching thing more? And my thought is, if I wait to a 5-minute period when the kid asks me a question and then give a 5-minute explanation of history when the kid asks me something, he or she will remember it. Whereas if I go in there without consent and just blah, 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 tune out, blah, 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 again, I remember nothing from high school, even though I got straight A's.
Yeah, see, this is the thing that, this is the paradigm shift that's happening right now. The idea that, I remember reading about how AP history, you're covering so much, it's going so fast that really you only get like a day, maybe a day and a half to cover World War II. And World War II, really, to understand all the dynamics, you need a month at least, right? To really understand power and geography and the individuals involved. And so, it's this idea of, do we want to be thin in material that we don't understand and don't really understand the context? We may understand the dates, right? We may understand some of the players. We don't know who they were. We don't know their upbringing, their politics. Or do we want to go deep into some areas like you did with the French Revolution, where you now understand context, and now that never leaves you. That information, that understanding about these larger issues never leave. And so that's kind of what you're moving forward on, yes?
Big time. And actually, just to address AP, so we do teach advanced placement courses. Of course, the kids opt, so it's with consent. But with AP history, what a lot of people don't realize is you can often get all of the multiple choice questions wrong and still get a 5, the top score on an AP exam, because it turns out that the essays, so the AP exams are about half multiple choice and half essays. What everybody does, what all the regular teachers do, is they do exactly what you said, Matt. They've got this 1,000-page textbook and they race through this. The kids get indigestion, intellectual indigestion. They're doing flashcards to memorize stuff that's absolutely meaningless. But meanwhile, if they're really good at the essay part, a 0 is an extreme, but they don't have to do that well on the multiple choice. But I think most teachers and students, they know how to cover content. That school is a machine for covering content. Yeah. So I'll give you one specific example of how AP history questions work. There was one that had a bunch of this is document-based question. They had a bunch of history newspaper clips from the 19th century about the game of cricket in India. And the question was something on, what does it say about colonialism and imperialism in 19th century India? Which meant that nobody ever expected the students to study anything at all about cricket before the test. But you should know enough about those big concepts to know, the way in which the Indian journalist is talking about it, the way in which the British journalist is talking about it. That is, if you know the big ideas, you can do really well on the essay questions. Obviously, you need to read, write, and think, but that's what we do every day in Socratic. So even with AP, I have a very different approach from the coverage thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I think everyone, and again, and let me ask this question. Sorry, Kath, if you had another question there, but when you deal with parents, Michael, I'm guessing that there's some element of fear around, well, if we follow this different, I would argue better model that you're describing, that's really hard to argue against intellectually, is my child somehow going to be damaged and injured in their attempts to go to the next level? And your point is that the AP exam that you lead, the preparation for it, it actually does better than the traditional.
Right. So the high school I created in New Mexico, the charter high school, was ranked the 36th best public high school in the United States based on AP performance. So our students were passing and doing well on AP exams better than all the 35 schools above us were basically magnet schools or high wealthy suburban schools.
Right.
And even the SAT, I actually love the SAT. Most alt-ed people are anti-test. Hey, if you want to do well on a test, go for it. I think of it as like an audition. So American Idol, kids will, or adults will, stand in line for days to be humiliated by Simon, what's his name?
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But so if we want to show we're great, let's take a test and think of it as an audition. And with the Socratic, our students tend to do very well on the SAT verbal, because if you look at the SAT verbal, it's complex passages and nuanced questions on those. One of the reasons, again, I always say the best thing about my education personally is I grew up in northern Minnesota with bad TV reception, which meant I became a voracious reader. You know, by sixth grade, I was reading 200 pages a night. And yeah, that's why when I took the SAT as a high school senior, I did well enough to get into Harvard, even though I didn't even know what it was. But kids, Renaissance Learning, with one of the largest reading software companies in the US, did a study a couple of years old, but I bet it's the same data. The average high school senior reads 7 minutes a week, which basically means a handful of kids are readers, and most of them are not reading at all. And so this notion of, you know, SAT verbal prep, well, if you're not reading, you haven't read, you know, a book outside of school, you know, ever. Of course, SAT is hard, but read, it's all easy.
Yeah.
And SAT math requires a little bit more focused preparation for most students. Some do well spontaneously, but you know, often my students have an SAT verbal score 100 points higher than the math score, but we administer the SAT, a free Khan Academy SAT, from 9th grade onward 3 times a year. And if you want to go to an elite school and your math score is 100 points behind, hey, I have the consent of the kid. They are often very motivated to crank it up so it's equal. I'm going to explain to them, look, with this different sets of scores, these are the schools you can get into. You crank your math up, these are the schools you can get into. Okay, get it, motivated, and then again, consent.
Nice.
I have a question, Michael. I know that you're very, very concerned, that you're very motivated to help you know, people who are really suffering in or stuck in high school, or, you know, have been harmed by high school or any school experience. Could you tell us a bit more about where that passion came from?
Sure, I would say that passion came from really being an educator in these alternative schools, seeing kids, kind of just going back to another dimension of Matt's question I didn't answer, which is relevant to your question, Kath. I would say in all my brick and mortar schools, only, you know, I have these ideals about education. I would say only 10 to 20% of parents and students are proactively choosing it. Most of the rest of them were escapees from the system. And they're escapees typically because it's not working, and in some cases harmed, sometimes awfully harmed. I have literally seen students who were suicidal in a regular system came to one of my schools happy and well. Students anxious, depressed, on medications, and within a few weeks or months, they go off of it. You know, I've written on how there's all this stuff about, you know, depression gene and so forth. Well, maybe some are more prone to it genetically, but in a healthy environment, I think adolescents are much less, even younger children are much less likely to be depressed. I think if any of us had to go to school, we would be depressed. I mean, oh
my God.
Yeah, you just think of the torture, absolute torture.
Yeah, I just, you know, I talk to families all the time, but this week, I talked to a friend whose son was just despondent. He graduated high school and he was so happy to be done. And I asked him, you know, tell me what was going on. He's like, I went to bed at 2 o'clock routinely. I mean, I had homework, I had pressure. I'm like, in what universe is that okay? Right? What, you know, bizarre universe is it okay for a 15, 16, 17-year-old to be under that kind of pressure, that many hours of work? I mean, I never did that in the most intense job I've ever had. So, all right. So,
well, just actually to spin out that. So one of the, I think that those of us who happen to have been good at school, really without effort, are then cruelly imposing school on other people we should not be imposing it on. You know, there are some people where, academics come easy, and then they think that they got to it by means of the school process. I actually think a lot of times, you know, maybe they had families. There's a whole, you know, correlation of books in the household and educational outcomes, also conversation with young children and educational outcomes. I don't think school is producing the outcomes, it's something else. And then those of us who are good in school then go and impose it on other people, and it's cruel and unusual punishment. You know, a lot of those kids where we're forcing them to take all these courses should be doing art or building things or creating businesses or doing a million other things.
So tell me, what else do you do in the Socratic experience? Is this really limited to the humanities and?
No, so I'll do math and then I'll jump to projects. So with math, again, I think individual math goals are appropriate. People do range considerably with respect to the way they learn math, and they can learn how to learn math better. But one size fits math is a catastrophe. I know I could have learned so much more math when I was in high school, and I wish that I had. I love math. I wish I'd done years more math. But and the great thing is here I want to give credit to software. Ed tech has made individualized math so much easier than it was, say, 30 years ago.
Yes.
So that now, basically our process is we work with students to set individual math goals. The default is a standard year of school math, but we have some students where half a year of school math is enough. Other students, I had one student who did 4 years of school math in 1 year. I actually knew a guy who's math champion of New Jersey, and he said he was a bad student in the back of the classroom until his teacher gave him a big stack of math textbooks, and he just worked through them all day. But individualized math, you set your goals. Again, more math is good. I'm definitely pro math, but it makes such a difference if the student has bought into their own math goals. And then, sometimes a little bit of a negotiation with parents if the students don't want to do as much of the same amount of math. But in general, this is why the startup finance course is valuable. Some kind of math is useful in the real world. I do think most of secondary math is only useful for certain people. Engineers may need calculus, but AP Stats is a better pathway than AP Calc. So some of this too is just being informed. When we help students pick goals, again, this is why your whole thing of vision is helping a child have a vision, Matt. It's very similar to what I do.
Yeah.
Instead of just one size fits all school, hey, for you, let's do very little math. For you, let's do stats. For you, let's do the calculus path. Whatever is appropriate for your path. What is your path? Let's work together and think about it. And once we're all on board with a vision and a path, then again, we have consent. The students buy-in. Students owning their own education is number one. So that's just the math piece. I could talk about science and history and whatnot, but also student buy-in. But projects, we encourage every student to have a project based on their own interest from early on. Part of our personal growth is how to choose and select and do projects. We have students share virtually, it's via video project. We have a kid sharing how he's learning to wax and sharpen his downhill skis, somebody else learning to cook his favorite meals for his dad, somebody else learning to make an exploding briefcase, James Bond style, fun, cool things. But ultimately, I had a student who created a Austin Terror Fest, a 3-day music festival in Austin, $80,000 budget, bands from around the world. Had students, create training videos for Kaiser Permanente, write for Atlas Obscura, 1 million monthly page views. I had a student who did the website for an American Idol finalist. Kids want to do, and Kath, this goes to Montessori valorization. Human beings want to be valuable in the world. Teens want to be valuable in the world. They want and need, very, in our bones or in our millions of years of evolutionary history, in the age of 12 or 13 in a healthy, normal indigenous society, they have some sense of responsibility to the community. So having them do real world things that are valued in the world, absolutely invaluable. So, on the one hand, highly personalized, education, learning, academics, where the student has bought into it. And on the other hand, real world projects. And my standard is every child should do at least adult level professional work. And I'd love them to do world-class professional work by the time they graduate. And I'm a great believer in ambition. So I, as a mentor, coach for students, I very much encourage them to be, our tagline is to discover and develop your child's genius. When I talk to the child is, what do you love? And I'm here to help make you amazing at what you love.
Mm-hmm. That is so good.
Well, thank you. And it's simple and human. One of the things, and that maybe you guys can use this, I think that all of this, was almost baked into culture at some point. And then school, one of my, aside from having kids kill themselves, maybe my second greatest anger at school is it's given such an unnatural, inhuman way to think about learning and, adolescence in particular, childhood as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Carol Black. So, because I think in a certain sense, a lot of parents, when they see that, oh, we could do it this way, this is why, I'm very aligned with what both of you are doing, because I think all parents, oh yeah, we don't need to do the school thing. Instead, we coach and mentor them well. We put them in peer groups. We have them do real world stuff. Hello, yes.
Right, where you been all my life.
Right. Why did I do this to my kid? Why was I doing this to my kid? Yeah.
Right. So, like, as far as being in a school environment or joining a program, how many days do you think is needed, like, to be in a program? Do you think it needs to be 5 days a week?
No, I mean, I've known, so again, Laura Deming is my model of high performance schooling, and she basically 2 hours of piano, 2 hours of math, 2 hours of reading every day, and that was her entire program. I know a lot of homeschooling families that do 2 or 3 hours a day. My kids unschooled for a year, where my son, who's 8, would do a couple of hours of a math enrichment program a week, and then read what he wanted to read and drew and played Legos. So I would say his program was this cool math enrichment program, reading books because he was a reader, lots of Legos, So yeah, that's the other thing is, as long as they're developing, most of school is a waste of time. I see school as actively preventing kids from reading, learning, thinking, doing, exploring. So to that extent, I'm very sympathetic to self-directed learning, unschooling.
Yeah. Michael, you talked a little bit about tech and the addictive qualities of technology. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more, because there's actually 2 questions that I get more than any other when I start talking to families. The first is around socialization, which I'd like you to speak to if you could. And then the second one is around, what should I be doing with my kids? Facebook, Fortnite, Xbox, I mean, just heck, YouTube. And what are your thoughts? I mean, you've talked about it a little bit. Give me some more about that.
Sure. So a bunch of different issues there. I want to kind of back up a little bit. Montessori has an independent work period where the kids are in long independent work every morning. Cal Newport, one of my favorite authors, talks about deep focus, and focus is the IQ of the 21st century. So one of my main concerns about tech is just the instant gratification aspect. I've got caught up in the YouTube algorithm where it shows you another fun video, and I'm not a gamer, but we know games are designed for this impulse. Whereas when I'm reading or thinking or solving a hard math problem, I need, lying on the couch looking at nothing. I need to kind of pull back from stimulation. I think a lot of us doing our best deep focused work need to be in a space where we're in a state of flow in the sense of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and we're not getting external stimulation all the time. And so I'm very much a believer that to do great work for many people, maybe not all, but for many people, requires the habit of deep work. And tech, again, all stimulation all the time, typically prevents us from that. The other, and again, a part of it is just that addictive quality, but go ahead.
Hold on. So let's go a little deeper. So would you then advocate, so again, like, if we're talking about giving children freedom, then how do we then, put limits on their access to tech? And then if we do put limits on that tech, what's the mechanism to do that? Is it, you give me your thoughts on that.
Right. So again, going back to Montessori prepared environment, I would have them be tech free for as long as possible. When my children are young, this is even before cell phones with television. My wife and I would watch television after the kids went to bed, but it's sort of like almost like a dirty thing. Don't show them the screen. They were raised in an environment with no electronic stimulation. Maybe occasionally there'd be family night with movies where we would all watch a movie. And it would be a family experience. I'm very big on old-fashioned family experiences, dinner together. If your family can sing together, that's incredible. We did improv games together. I think human to human or deep focus as much as possible. Tech is a distraction. So yeah, I would be keep the tech away as long as possible. And I want to acknowledge in today's society, you can't do that forever. At some point it becomes hard. So at some point when they have tech, I haven't kept up to speed on, monitoring and so forth, but I would certainly limit access to addictive activities as long as possible. You know, and hopefully you've raised your child well. At some point they have this internal stability. They love doing valuable things like talking and reading and playing with the family and building things and all of that. So when they use tech, it's a choice. I think if, again, I'm not a Puritan, so once we have the internal, this is habits, attitudes, once we have the internal stability, I'm not worried about what kids are exposed to. I'm worried about what kids are pickled in. And so if they're pickled in either you know, schooling or electronic addictions, that's not good.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you're switching one thing out for another.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, all right. So so tech free as long as possible. You know, adding, you know, there's a ton of tech tools that can limit access to different sites. I think the major issue that that I tend to coach on, and we can go to the next question if you could, but major issue is that you're still the parent, and so you wouldn't let your child play in the street because they want to. It's dangerous there, so you put limits. So you put a fence around, you know, your yard. So to me, it's a similar deal. So,
you can use my analogy of, would you give them a pile of heroin or cocaine? No, you know, yeah, you're the parent.
Right.
That's right.
Okay. On the socialization question, is that the one you wanted to go to next?
Yep.
Yeah, so here I would say the most powerful thing is that a lot of my schools, I've had a lot of homeschoolers come in because we're more flexible than regular schools. And almost invariably, 99 out of 100 times, the homeschoolers come in way more mature and better socialized. This is one of the, I would say, most outrageous arguments, is that homeschoolers are not socialized adequately. No, school, you know, if you want to anti-socialize your kid, put them in a large public middle school. Lord of the Flies, I would say, you know, if you want to get school choice, let's put live cams in the lunchroom and bathrooms of large public schools. And parents, any sane parent would pull their kids out right away.
Absolutely.
Yeah, homeschooling is the multi-age group, as in Montessori. They play with older kids, they play with younger kids, they teach younger kids. Kids spontaneously want to teach each other when you let them have the opportunity. You know, we've all talked about this, but I can't say enough for how important that human development is. Kids from different, and adults, meeting and talking with adults, and not people teaching us, but, you know, an adult having a conversation with us. That's why give you one other anecdote. When I was doing the Montessori middle schools in Palo Alto, there were two Stanford seniors who had been in the Montessori school I'd been at a decade earlier, and asked them, did Montessori give them any advantage at Stanford? They said not academically. Their public school peers had been just as well educated academically, but they were so much more comfortable talking to adults that they could casually talk to their professors and got a lot more out of their experience at Stanford because they're used to talking to adults. And, you know, you never think of, oh, why is regular school harmful? It makes you a defective human being who can't talk to adults. I believe that.
Yeah, and adults are such resource people for homeschoolers. You know, you go to adults and you ask them questions because they've had more experience. And you do have those deep conversations, and they're also bridges to opportunities, to potential internships and all these things. So,
and learning, you know,
and
I mean,
learning.
And I just want to call out Olivia, your daughter, Matt, because she's on LinkedIn having conversations with people and talking about real stuff. And it was like, hey, a real grown-up human being.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. To Kat's point, increasingly, a 15-year-old, 14-year-old can say, I want to learn about, pick your topic, right? And they can find an individual that's an expert in that topic, ask them a few questions, including to me, the granddaddy question of them all, which is, if I want to learn more about this topic, what would you recommend I do? Right? Because normally, you know, my kid wants to learn about engineering and I'm like, I don't know. So I don't know, pick something, right? An engineer would say, you know what, don't bother with that stuff. Here's what you should read. Watch this video, watch this, talk to this person, right? It just shortens the learning curve so much. So
and just to address to that, right now we have parents anxious over grades and test scores. I'd love to see a world where parents were anxious about their kids becoming kind of passive and disengaged. You know, you know, they should have alarm bells going off when you know, their kids are passive and disengaged, and that's what schooling does to a certain percentage of kids.
Wow. So how can people find out more about your program and maybe, talk to you about it and see if it's a good fit for their family?
Yeah, so Michael at socraticexperience.com. We're in transition on our website, so the website is still expanseonline.co, but it's socraticexperience.com is coming up soon. And I also have a YouTube channel that is Socratic Michael Strong, where they can see me interviewing kids, or not interviewing, having Socratic conversations with children ages 4 through 8. I'm very active on Facebook and LinkedIn. Happy to have people befriend me. And yeah, I'm very passionate about this, whether they enroll in Socratic Experience or whether they just want to talk about learning, want to be on this show. I'm out to liberate as many kids as possible from the damage of schooling.
And what age do you start?
So the Socratic Experience is ages 8 and up. We were middle school last year, but we're calling it a novice program for upper elementary for you Montessorians out there, and then the high school program. And what we found is that parents who are aligned with our program often had children who were younger or older, and so we just have this continuous experience. Just as a Montessorian, Kath, we're designing our novice program. I've got a couple of great Montessorians designing it. So they'll actually do activities off computer, but we'll have parents help their child set up a little sort of Montessori space right there. So the kid is not staring at the screen all day, but they're doing their independent work while the guide can kind of observe them. So we're trying as much as possible even to replicate the Montessori experience for our younger children.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the concept. I can tell you, I have talked before about the importance of communication and that is a superpower, and most kids never practice it, but it sounds like every day there's constant practicing of communication, getting your thoughts clear, being able to verbalize those thoughts, and then eventually writing them. So that's a real benefit for your program.
Big time.
And also, I'm sorry, I was just going to give you a compliment, Michael, about you've just had so much experience making so many different programs, and you've really seen the problems. And then, over the years, you've tweaked it, so you've got this down to a fine art, in exactly, a really efficient way to get children where they need to be successful in their life.
Well, thank you.
And,
No, it does feel it's just kind of boiled down. But just on the communications, years ago in the 1980s, I read an article that most people making over 100,000 a year were great communicators. And even whether they're a doctor or, an auto mechanic who is a great communicator is going to be more valuable than an auto mechanic who's not. And 100K then is probably 150, 180K today. But people with very high level reading, writing, speaking, listening skills is going to be more valuable everywhere.
Oh yeah, no question. And again, that even gets into this issue of sales, which most folks, when you hear the term sales, they think of a car salesman or something kind of low quality. But the folks who are making good money in every industry, they are selling ideas all day long. Ideas about direction of the company, or here's the new product that we need to bring on board, et cetera, right?
Yeah, entrepreneurship is mostly sales. You got to sell to investors, you got to sell to customers, you sell to partners. It's selling all the time. Go Cal.
But also, well, it's also becoming a really good listener. And that if a child is a good listener and has got that skill, then they're going to be a good father and create good families, because they're actually going to be listening to their children, and they're going to pick a partner thoughtfully, right? Because they're now thinking all the time. And just and I've seen over the years so many teenagers who just have a really hard time thinking, because they have been so used to that stimulation and that quick fix, and they haven't really developed an appreciation for really thinking deeply about things. And I think it's by doing what you're doing that a child is going to develop that and really enjoy it as they develop that too, because they're going to be talking about relevant things, and they're going to be interesting at the kitchen table when you're having dinner and those sort of things. So it's just a very impressive model, and I really hope that people listening will really give it a good look.
Yeah, and heck, just reach out to him. He offered to talk to you, even if you're not interested in his program. I mean, I think he's willing. You know, I've sent some people your way, Michael. I appreciate you helping even some young learners think, differently about their approach. So, folks listening, take him up on that offer. He's a wealth of information, I tell you.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I talk to people all the time about this.
Okay, I've got one last question. Kat, can I?
Of course.
All right, Michael, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Here's the one question. Now, some families are going to say, I like what Michael's doing, but I got to stay or keep my child in the traditional model for whatever reason. So if you could wave your magic wand and change one thing about that traditional educational model, what would that be?
It might be a cheat, but I would say the one thing is let money follow the child. That is, let parents choose where I'm a big fan of school choice. The least regulated, the better. This last 6 months has been the best period in recent history where parents can use the money to take the child to wherever program. It's not one right answer. We need 1,000 different kinds of schools, and parents and families need to be able to spend government education dollars in whatever way they believe is most appropriate for their particular child.
Interesting. All right. Thank you.
All right. And I have one last question too, and it's not my usual one, but I want you just to quickly address, I imagine that the Socratic Experience is not an accredited program, but I know that they are doing courses that are accepted by universities, and it's not really a big deal these days. But I think that if you could just address that for the parents potentially who might be interested in your program about whether, accreditation should be a deal breaker or not.
That's a great question. Well, first, I want to thank you, Kath, because we are using NARS. And I always forget what NARS stands for, but we do offer a credit. Do you remember what it stands for, Kath?
Yeah, it's North Atlantic Regional High School.
Thank you. So we are using NARS in order to provide accredited courses where the families want it. But we have both an accredited and unaccredited option, the accredited through NARS and unaccredited without NARS. And the way I explain to parents is that most private schools, most art, design, film schools want performance rather than simple accreditation. Some public universities, it might be easier with the accredited courses, and public high schools are the very worst. And so the biggest reason to bother with accreditation is if your child may need to go back to a public high school at some point. But insofar as they are going for some sort of place where performance matters, then accreditation is perfectly irrelevant. Again, SAT scores and AP scores are very important. Accredited courses, most high schools have very low level anyway, so an accredited low level is meaningless. So I want us all to be about performance and what's best for the child. So the only reason to really care about it is going back to public high schools or some state universities. And we even go state by state. Depending on what state you're in, let's check to see. Basically, homeschoolers have bashed down the doors in most universities so that anybody can get in. But I do encourage sort of checking to see exactly how bureaucratic your state university system is, if that's where you want to go. But the private schools don't care at all.
And, I would go further, Michael, and that is if a school, bureaucratic or otherwise, is saying that we want an accredited, we don't care about your ability to perform. We want documentation that you check these boxes. You may want to ask the question, is that the school you actually want to attend? Is that the university you want to go to?
My heart is totally with you, Matt. Totally with you. And that's, exactly. Ultimately, it's about real world performance. And we've had so many guests on this show who have created great lives for themselves by means of just being amazing. So Steve Martin has a clip, be so amazing they can't ignore you. And that's part of how I coach my kids. Be so amazing they can't ignore you. Beyond that, no rules.
That's an awesome way to end the show, Michael.
Thank you. All right. I wish we were in person. So next time, field trip to Kath's house, and we all have fun up there.
Awesome.
Down for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys. It was
Great
fun.
conversation, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Guys.